No, I do want to start with a story this morning. I headed up to London on Friday. Spent the day up in London visiting or meeting with a friend of mine who I met while I was walking the Camino last year. The plan had been for him actually to come down to Battle. He's from the Netherlands. He was over in the UK for about a week. And the plan had been for him to travel down on Thursday and then head back up yesterday morning. Obviously, the trains decided to do their thing, and in the end it was worked out with him needing to get his connection or various things. I said, well, I'll come up to London and we'll spend the day there. He'd done a number of sites, so a few more he wanted to do, and we had a great day together. Story, though, was I was sitting on the train, making my way up to Charing Cross, so I was going to get out. I can't remember exactly where I was, but I'm sitting there, and there's a few other people around me, and the ticket collector comes through, starting to check people's tickets. I don't know if you're like me. Usually it's that moment where I suddenly realise my wallet's in my pocket, and I've got to try and get it out, and it's stuck, and that's something. But you get it out, and he shows it. He moves on to this other guy. It turns out he's been sold the wrong ticket. Well, he's bought it from the machine, and it isn't quite right for the particular route that he's going to go on to. He's going to change somewhere and this sort of thing. And so the ticket instructor, I think very graciously, is trying to explain this to him. A couple of times he uses the word unfortunately, at which point this guy just sitting across from me, so a few seats away from the guy who's interacting with the ticket collector, kind of stands up and says, there's nothing unfortunate about it, and basically starts, I would say, having a go at the ticket inspector. And the whole thing about how he had a day off yesterday, and we obviously support you, but come on, give the guy a break, and all this sort of stuff. And in the end, the guy sat down, and the ticket collector said, well, can we just have this conversation with this gentleman, please? He then actually sat down next to him, because it so happened that he was had this other guy in his eye line standing up. So he sat down, and they were continuing to chat. And then about a minute or so later, the guy got up again, and he kind of leaned over and said, are you all right? To the guy who got the wrong ticket, saying, basically, do you need me to help argue your case? And the guy said, no, I'm fine, thanks. He sat down again, sort of thing. And the situation kind of concluded, and we went about our business and slowly got off for different places and that sort of thing. Now, I was reflecting on this, thinking about it, particularly coming this morning, and my initial thought was, well, there's an example of someone who is not gentle. That guy, the way he just kind of carried himself, the way his language, the way he interacted, and all this sort of stuff. You think, if ever we're looking for an example of someone who doesn't personify gentleness, then there is one for us. My second thought, though, I felt God prompted me with saying, but hold on a second, you don't know his situation. You don't actually know, what he's going through. Maybe that is just the kind of person he is, but you don't know that. Maybe actually what he's facing that day, where he was heading to, actually just meant that it just bubbled up inside of him, and that's why he responded in the way that he did. And then kind of a further thought that I felt God remind me was just this sense that we're all works in progress, and none of us have got it sorted. And so when we come to continue to think about the fruit of the Spirit, we need to remember that this is an ongoing process. The fact that next week we're going to reach the last one doesn't mean we can then kind of, black out these bits in the Bible and go, yeah, we've done that. Okay, we'll move on to something else then. Because it is a constant process of growing, of seeking to develop. And there'll be different ones, as we've said, that will be harder for us than others. Some that will really, challenge us time and time again. Others that will come to us much more easily. But we are, as Kevin said, we're looking this morning at the fruit of gentleness. And I came across this article this week entitled 4 Reasons Pastors Ought to Be Gentle. Depending on how you read that, I suppose, is it suggesting that pastors need to be more gentle? Maybe there was some kind of survey, maybe you're aware of it, that went on behind the scenes, and actually the results are in, and basically pastors could do a lot better at it. I was slightly kind of less concerned when I actually discovered that it was based on a more generic article, which was 4 reasons we ought to be gentle, and someone had just reposted it and put the word pastor at the top of it. And I was even more kind of relieved when I realized that actually it's based on a book by a guy called Dane Ortland, Gentle and Lowly, which has the subheading, The Heart of Christ for Sinners and Sufferers. And this whole challenge of what does it mean to look at the person of Jesus, his example, and think about the impact that needs to have on our lives day in, day out as disciples. If we just think about these four reasons that were suggested, whether we're a pastor or not, depending which article you kind of were to come across. Initially, he suggested gentleness surprises people. Gentleness surprises people. Ortland said, in this angry, irritated world, gentleness sticks out. It catches us off guard. Amid the clamour, above the din, a gentle voice arrests us. Gentleness surprises people. Secondly, he said, gentleness woos people. My initial response is, there's a word I don't use enough, maybe. Maybe I should use it more, I don't know. He says, like a sea anemone slowly being coaxed to open up again, gentleness coaxes people to open up. Gentleness, he says, makes people feel safe. Thirdly, gentleness dignifies people. He would suggest that the subtext of gentleness is you matter. You matter. That's why, you are, significant, and I'm not going to neglect you. God made you in his own image, and therefore the way that I interact with you needs to be thought through and needs to be done in the best way possible. The fourth, though, reason that he gives, and the one that I just think speaks volumes, he says gentleness gives people a living picture of Jesus himself. Gentleness gives people a living picture of Jesus himself. He goes on to say, outside of word and sacrament, the closest thing to Jesus himself that people will get in this fallen world is you. I don't know what that makes you think. I love that idea of gentleness gives people a living picture of Jesus himself. And there's that reality, isn't it, that if the fruit of the Spirit, if gentleness, if it is evident in our lives, then that is going to be like a living picture of who Jesus is. It's going to speak positively into their experience of Jesus, of faith, of all that the difference being a disciple can make. I don't know about you, though, but as I reflected on that, I found that massively humbling, but also massively challenging. It's one of those things that's so easy, as often we can just kind of gloss over it. But actually, if people are going to, through me, hopefully see something of Jesus, I want to ask that question, is that what they're seeing? And if they're not, then I want to do something about it. So we're going to just kind of use that fourth reason as a springboard this morning to think through some of what it means to grow in the fruit of the Spirit that is gentleness. One of the books I'm reading at the moment is a book all about those who are often termed the great revivalists. So people back through history who have been there in those moments. God has used in ways that if we've heard their stories, if you're certainly like me, you just go, I want some of that. I wish I could have been there. I want to experience the move of God in the ways that they did. And I'm currently reading about John and Charles Wesley. And not exclusively, but John was generally more the preacher. Charles was the hymn writer. And it was he who penned the words, gentle Jesus, meek and mild, look upon a little child, pity my simplicity, suffer me to come to thee. Amazing words of that hymn and many of the hymns that they penned, which we still use and are still sung today. I don't know what that image, though, comes to mind when we think of gentle Jesus, meek and mild. Maybe, if we're kind of honest, or maybe just kind of our first, maybe slightly flippant response, might be it's a picture of Jesus. He's sitting on a hillside. It's a sunny day. It's glorious. Maybe there's a bird or two in the sky, not a cloud, though, at all. And he's sitting on a nice, clean rock, and there's a load of grass around him. There's people gathered. Few children sitting on the floor, and they're perfectly still and silent, just focused on him. He's holding a lamb, and the lamb's face is just a picture of innocence, and it's just wonderful. Okay, that's a bit over the top, but I wonder whether sometimes there is something of that when we think of, gentle Jesus. That's a bit of it's not really what we're after, is it? I want to actually just start by kind of almost shouting down some of the things that gentleness is not. Some of those things that maybe we don't instantly go to, but just feed into our view of what it is and the impact it should make in our lives. I mean, Paul writes in Galatians 5, the verses we've been reflecting on, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Gentleness, it's not a weakness. It's not something that is kind of, well, it's not really what you want, but I suppose we'll kind of go for it. Neither is it those kind of people who are shy or timid. Oh, they're gentle. Yeah, that's, It's not something that we kind of equate to pandering to others either. Gentleness is kind of always allowing others to go first and them have the last word. And us, we don't want to kind of put our foot. No. I always want you to have the choice. And I'm just going to let others go me through. I don't think that's gentleness either. Nor is it some kind of, passive-aggressive response where actually there is quite a subtext to what we're doing or what we're saying, however much it might come across as very friendly and very kind and all that sort of thing. We're going to look at the person and the example of Jesus very front and center this morning in terms of that answer of what does it mean to grapple with the fruit of the Spirit that is gentleness, and how should it be evident in our lives. And as an aside, it occurred to me this week as an exercise, and I've not done this, but I suppose out of this series, it's something I'd love to explore maybe in the future, is to actually read through the gospel accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but specifically looking for the fruit of the Spirit in Jesus. Spoiler alert, it's there, just so it's not like, where's Wally? Is it going to appear? But actually to go through it, we've used that phrase with this series, through the lens of Galatians 5, but actually kind of to read the gospel accounts and specifically look at the narrative and see where Jesus models these different fruit, which he does. And not just kind of to pick in and out, but actually to kind of reflect on the bigger picture. We're not going to do that this morning for a whole load of reasons. But I think it's maybe something to consider, or as you read through maybe your daily reading notes, to actually where is the fruit of the Spirit in here? How can I see the examples that Jesus models? Because it's recognizing that it needs to be, as Emma used that illustration of the Satsuma last week, it needs to be something both inside and outside in our lives. It's not just something on the surface, it's got to go deep. And that's what we see in Jesus. It's the whole idea, I suppose, of how do we kind of, take kingdom knowledge and we couple it with kingdom obedience. So I want to understand the truths of God, but I want to apply them to my lives just as much. So I want to encourage you to have your Bibles open. We're going to jump around to a few different verses, or your YouVersion app, open and on. If you're not aware, obviously I know a number of people in conversation have downloaded it since Jenny suggested it the other week. The other thing you can do, you may be aware, is you can actually download the different translations of the Bible. So if you're ever then kind of without internet, I know, how do we cope? You can still access it, which is something that's worth doing just as an aside. I want to turn to Matthew 11, and we're going to start with a verse that is very familiar to us as a church, which I'll explain in a moment. Matthew 11, 28 to 30. Jesus is speaking, and he says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." As I said, we're seeking to respond to this in one of our 4 values, being rest. Respond because, again, it's not something that we've kind of ticked off and done. It's constantly seeking to grow in terms of all that God has ahead for us, the best that he has for us. And these verses are reminding us that if Jesus is the Lord and King of my life, then his rule is not one of tyranny, but it's characterized by gentleness. And we need to remember that Jesus is speaking into a time and a place and a culture where tyranny was really what the listeners knew all too well. The oppressive rule of the Romans was not something that was light-hearted, or they could kind of take it or leave it by any stretch of the imagination. And so from the very start, Jesus' pace is completely different to that of the world around him. And it still remains the same today as we've reflected back over the last couple of years in different series and different things we've been reading. This thing that actually, Jesus' pace is totally countercultural. It was when he walked on the earth, and it still is today. And it hasn't changed. His rule will still and will always be one that is characterized by gentleness. A gentleness that has a completely different pace to it. That doesn't mean there'll be times when we find ourselves full of lots of different things. It doesn't mean you can never have a diary that you get to the end of the week and you go, I don't know how I've got through that. But it's how we go through those times that matters. It's how we embark upon those periods of life that should be different. Going a little further on in Matthew 12, so the next chapter, verse 20, it says, a bruised reed he will not break, and a smouldering wick he will not snuff out, till he has brought justice through to victory. This is actually Isaiah that's being quoted. Isaiah 41, 1-4 is the full section there that the gospel writer is quoting. So think about this. In many ways, I think we could put it up there with the word woo. Apologies if you use that word a lot. I don't hear it that much, which is why I'm assuming it's not really in current vocabulary. In the same sense, the idea of a bruised reed, or a smouldering wick. I certainly don't use those phrases much. Maybe, again, you do. The point is, if we look at what Jesus is trying to communicate here, the idea of a bruised reed, instead of just breaking it off, because there's nothing good in it anymore. No, it suggests he's more likely going to bind it, hoping that it will grow strong again. And should he come to a flame that's barely there, it's not just, let's snuff it out, but no, let's fan it back into life. Let's nurture it. Let's see it develop. Let's see it become great once again. And in a world that today, for all the talk of recycling and upcycling and generally cycling, we find ourselves, don't we, though, in a culture that, products aren't built to last. And actually, you might as well just throw it away and get another one. And maybe we do that kind of secretly because we don't want people to realize that we're not getting into the whole recycling sort of thing. But Jesus' way isn't like that at all. He doesn't say, you're not quite up to it, or you're not quite good enough. We might use the phrase, we might have that experience, I know it could be a very evocative word, but of being damaged because of things that have happened in life, things that have happened to us, things that we've seen, experiences that have kind of come along and have just affected us. And sometimes the world would use that word to suggest that, you're not good enough. The world would use that word to suggest, actually, you're past there. You haven't got anything else to offer. Whereas Jesus looks beyond these things. He doesn't allow them to cloud his view of you when he looks at you and sees who you are and all that he wants to do in and through you. In the same way, if we're feeling drained and weary, as if we've got little left to give, Jesus doesn't go, actually, you can just stay seated. I'd rather go for someone who's got a bit more energy. I'd rather go for someone who's, still up for it. But actually, you've passed it now. Thanks very much. The door's over to your left. That's not how Jesus works. But yet, actually, that's often how the world works, isn't it? That actually, once you've kind of maybe aren't able to fully function, or you're up against it, we're kind of said, thanks, but no thanks. Whereas Jesus' gentleness is one that he wants us to grow and develop. He wants us to be brought back to complete health and better. He wants us to realize our full potential. And our full potential in him. Not our potential that other people say, this is what you should do, or this is when you've made it. But no, actually, the best that he has for us. It's a gentleness that is about care and compassion, love and understanding. Moving on, though, if we turn to the book of Luke, and Luke 15, we find ourselves in 3 parables that Jesus tells. A verse just from the third one, verse 20. So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The parable of the prodigal son, if there's ever a parable that has kind of layer upon layer upon layer upon layer, this is certainly a contender for it. Jesus tells, as I say, 3 parables, and he's telling them, and he's surrounded by a group of tax collectors and sinners. Verse 2, the Pharisees mutter, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." And Jesus, in part, is kind of saying, yeah, you're right. I do. You don't, but this is who I am. Because actually, I came for all. That includes those you've singled out. It actually includes those who were even pointing the fingers. But Jesus paints this picture in this 3rd parable of these 2 sons and their different choices. But he also of this father and the love that he has for both of his sons, irrelevant of the choices and the decisions they've made, because his love for them is ultimate. I read, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him, was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. Jesus, I think, is describing something here of his very character, of actually his compassion, his generousness, his slow to anger, kind of qualities that are just woven throughout this parable that in itself could fill and does fill endless reflections and sermons. But it's a gentleness, again, that looks beyond the things of this world. We could write so many alternative versions to that parable as to how the world would view it, in terms of what the sons should have rightly got or not, of how it should have been outworked. But they're not the story that Jesus told. And I wonder whether some of what Jesus' gentleness means to us, or needs to mean to us, is actually to listening to the story that he is telling about our lives. And stop listening to the story that others are telling us is supposedly the truth and nothing else. Now, we could go on. Look at various other passages. We could look at the way Jesus entered Jerusalem, as it's recorded in Matthew 21. See, your king comes to you gentle and riding on a donkey and on a colt, the foal of a donkey. Again, pointing to the fact that Jesus is going to be a very different king to the one that they have been, maybe some of them hoping for, they've been expecting from those who are ruling around us. Look at Jesus' account of his arrest, recorded across the Gospels, the fact that he doesn't fight back. There's even that point, I think it's in Matthew's Gospel, where he says to, one of the followers who's lopped off the ear of the servant of the high priest, he heals the guy. He takes the time to heal someone who's with those who are arresting him. I'm not sure our response would be in that thing, but it just, again, illustrates the willingness that he has, his gentleness. And then what about John 19, 26 to 27? Maybe fitting because today's Mother's Day. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, "Woman, here is your son." And to the disciple said, "Here is your mother." From that time on, that disciple took her into his home. And even as he's hanging on the cross, Jesus is thinking of others. Now, those 3 will consider across Holy Week in literally 2 or 3 weeks' time. But the thing is that it just reminds us again that Jesus doesn't compromise what he's about, the reason he's here, the reason he came, because of the situation he gets into. And yes, there are those passages where he gets frustrated, I think, where he is angry. But the manner in which Jesus carries himself, never lose sight of who he is and the model that he should be. And for all that we could pull him apart and that sort of thing, there's never one point where Jesus isn't modeling what it means to be gentle. The way he approaches people, the way he interacts with people, the manner in which he delivers himself from place to place. Now, however we might kind of view gentleness, whether we still kind of maybe think, well, it's a bit kind of Jesus sitting on a hillside with an innocent-looking lamb, whether we actually think, well, it's not really for me, or and that sort of thing. I want to offer 3 thoughts as I finish as to how we might kind of take this forward, how we might apply this. I was chatting to Kevin before, and then I said, I think, the fruit of the Spirit, of all the kind of series we've done in recent times, I think this is one that really each week has different things. I think we need to be willing to think through, so what is this going to do for me this week? How am I going to seek to take something of this and apply it? Or just take the moment to reflect on, is this something that I'm modeling or not? And if not, how am I going to hope to change that? 3 thoughts I had was, 1, do we know our trigger points? Do we know those things that cause us, to put it another way, to act in a not so gentle manner? Are there those things that we know will get us off guard and we're off? And we are carrying ourselves in ways that are not going to put a smile on God's face, to use that kind of concept. And how are we kind of prepared for that? So if we know we're going into a situation that we know is going to be difficult, because last time we were in that situation it was difficult, how are we asking God to help us, particularly as we enter that battlefield? So what are do we know our trigger points? Secondly, can we start the day as we mean to go on? Last week, if you were with us, Emma suggested that kind of prayer that we could use at the start of each day. So as you're doing your teeth, as you're making a cup of tea or throughout the day, come, Holy Spirit, grow in me. Again, if this is something that we know we struggle with, how is it something that we can be praying that God would particularly minister to us in? Yeah, how can I be that living picture of Jesus? And then thirdly, how might we reflect back? It's very easy to go through a situation and to find ourselves going, well, that didn't really go very well, did it? And that's it. Do we ever take time to pause and to reflect back on what's happened? You may have come across the daily examine, which is a technique of prayerfully reflecting at the end of a day back on the day's events. And I know that's something that some here use, and maybe that's something. For me, I personally find it's the next morning. I will often try and reflect back on the previous day, just to think through kind of what's happened and what's gone on. But it's asking that question, how can I purposely detect God's presence at the start of the day, maybe at the end of the day, but seeking to grow in this? It was Anne de Formantel who apparently wrote in her book, Power of Gentleness, that gentleness was, above all things, a force of potentiality. As I read that, I just love that idea of, well, asking the question, I suppose, what is it that God's going to do in and through us this week as we seek to embody this fruit? Let's pray. God, I want to thank you for your grace with each of us. I want to thank you for those times when we get it wrong, that, as we heard earlier, your love is bigger than that. That doesn't become an end point in our story with you. And I pray that you will just minister to us now. I pray that by your Holy Spirit you will speak into our hearts, that we may respond to the things that you have been saying, that you will change us, Lord. You will transform us, that we may be the best we can be as that living picture of your Son, Jesus, that through us people will see you. And I want to pray boldly that through us lives will be transformed because you are at work within us and your power is on the move. Amen.